Welcome back to Maker Chat Live. I'm your host, Adam Krutinger. Today we're going to be talking graphic design with Cameron Garrity. Don't miss it. And welcome to the show, Mr. Cameron Garrity. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's funny, my instinct when I heard you say host Adam Krutinger, I almost went right into and Cameron, but
Yes, of course. Yeah, a lot of people will know exactly why. But one thing I want to talk to you, of course, about your graphic design because you've been doing it for a long time. You've got a lot of skill at it. And not only that, I know you have a lot of you've taught it, and as well as you have a lot of theories on how it can best be helpful to other artists that are not graphic designers. And I want to get into all that, but just to give people a flavor of just some of your work here, I pulled up a bunch of things from your series, your 10-minute typography, which I think is a good example of like the breadth of your work. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of photos here. And if you want to just do a brief mention about what some of these designs are and things like that. So
sure.
We have this one here.
Yeah, smile and say yes. That's a quote from Stephen Colbert. This was one of the first 10-minute typographies that I did, and it's actually probably one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, actually, why don't we mention too exactly what your goal is in the 10-minute typography, just to get people familiar.
Yeah. So I've worked as a professional graphic designer for the last 6 or 7 years now, pretty much right out of college. And I usually have worked in-house at a company or an organization, which has incredible perks, which I'm sure we'll be able to talk about in this discussion. But it ends up usually being that you spend a lot of time with the same fonts, the same colors, a lot because you want to have the same aesthetic for all of the work that you do. You want to make sure that people can recognize your design based on by everything. And as an artist, that could kind of get a little boring. And as someone who, when I first started doing this series, I didn't have that much time out of school or anything. So I wanted to make sure I was keeping up with all the programs. I wanted to continue to be experimenting with color and fonts and, just showing a bit of my personality. So I did this daily design challenge called 10-minute typography, where I spent roughly 10 minutes in Adobe Illustrator every day and make little squares like that and then share them on Instagram and stuff.
It's like going to the gym for graphic designers.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So now that people can have an idea of what it is, we showed them, of course, the smile one, which again, what I love about it is just the beauty in it is in its simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I've noticed in a lot of your work. And I'll bring up a couple of the other ones. I just pulled a handful of them down from
Sure.
Instagram. This one is cool. You exist, and that's enough. What was this quote from?
I think that I just came up with. Sometimes, you get to the end of a day, and there are certain either mantras or things that you hear or are feeling throughout a day, and sometimes like the words are kind of amorphous, but I just kind of put them out there and I try to match them with certain colors or imagery or whatever. And it just felt like I try to be as positive as I can when I do these, because I have heard really nice things from a lot of people that they get something out of these. So I want people, when they see the work, that it doesn't ruin their day and is hopefully a little bit of positivity and motivation.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, again, I'm gonna thumb through a couple more.
Sure. Yeah.
I love that. Again, even in the three that we've seen so far, what a variety already of looks that we have here. When pigs fly, their wings will be delicious.
Yes.
Quite a funny little quote there.
That one, it was
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. What's cool about that one that you picked out is actually it was right when usually a type file in Illustrator or what have you is just they're black letters that then you can determine what color they're going to be. But a couple of years ago, they created this new kind of type file where they were actually layered colors on top of each other. And it was just this really great. Like that font there that you see is straight out of the box.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I thought that was funny that week. I was doing specifically all my 10-minute typographies were shower thoughts. So they were things that either I had thought up of or someone, sometimes I'll borrow quotes that friends share. And then I pulled color from the font into the pig graphic.
Yeah. No, I liked it. That's turned out really nice.
Thanks.
And then actually, the pig graphic, where did that come from? Did you draw that, or is that from one of your sources?
No, that comes from there's a wonderful website called the Noun Project, and that's just the Noun Project, all one thing .com, and it's actually a nice way. I haven't personally used it for this, but you're able to upload your designs, and it's just like you could search for pigs, you could search for wings, you could search for soccer ball, and they're you could either pay to download them, or you could also download them for free if you do attribution. I pay like a service fee or whatever, so I'm able to just use it without having to credit the artist. But so and then you're able to color it and stuff because they're all vectors that you download.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, let's go on to a couple more, and then we'll move on to some more questions. And
sure.
Here it is. I love this one. This is very Cameron. This is your mantra, if anything.
That was one that I came up with myself. And for a long time, my Instagram handle was Pencil First, and that's also if I ever open up my own design studio.
I forgot about that. That's right. Yeah, just for people who are on audio only, it says "Come for the handwriting, but stay for the grammar." Really funny thing you got there. Awesome.
Yeah, that's a very me. Just design, and like that's definitely one of my like big ones that I make sure to show people when I talk about 10-minute typography. So sorta. Yeah.
And this is another one of yours.
Yeah.
This is was this one a font too? Did you have to do a lot of changing of things for this one?
No, that was just a font that I found, and I really liked how that type artist was playing with, using the dots and stuff. This is one of those I personally call it like a useless font because I don't know that there's ever a time where I would really want to use this for anything but like a 10-minute typography thing. And then, in terms of manipulation, it's a little hard to see, but the O and the T are a slightly different shade of gray than the S, the R, and the A. And then, of course, I took each of those circles there and gave them a specific color. And this one was so long ago, I don't remember if those colors corresponded to anything. Obviously, they're more or less the primary and a secondary color there. But a lot of times I'll actually... in addition to doing this design, I'll also import like a painting or an album art or something that I like, and pull colors from that to get the colors that I use in the 10-minute typography.
And just out of curiosity, what would make you? What's the placement on this one versus? Of course, most of them have been in the center, and this one is down low. What was the thought process behind that? And how do you make those choices?
It's really kind of an intuitive thing. Sometimes it's literally just because I'm thinking about the composition of my Instagram feed. If I've done a bunch of ones in the center, I'll just kind of move it down or up arbitrarily. Sometimes like something like this with sorta, it just feels on the heavier side. And it's also that word is sort of passive. So it made sense that it like wouldn't even use the energy to get itself to the middle of the composition. Like it's just kind of there at the bottom.
Yeah, that's great. That's funny. Yeah. Okay, so now that we've got an idea of a very basic idea of things that you've done, I think one thing I think is interesting about you is that you do have like I can kind of spot a Cameron Garrity design a mile away because you have such a vocabulary for things. I think I would say mostly composition wise and white space and blank space with the way you do it, which I think is really interesting. And I want to get into that a little later, but what I want to start with now is when you're designing something, where do you start?
I'm sorry, where do you start? So I always start on the design brief. I'm usually any graphic designer, um, with aside from like what I do at 10-minute typography, that's just me playing essentially or exercising, as you use that analogy earlier. But usually if you're designing something, it's because a client is asking you to do something for them. So you have to take into consideration how much time you have to do the project, who the client is, and what they're asking for. So from there, you kind of break it down into, okay, do I have a lot of time to like really think and marinate about like all the wonderful possibilities of this thing, or do I have to get it out in a really short amount of time? Um, and most of my experience, as I've said, has been in an in-house situation. So usually I don't have to spend that much time getting to know who the client is, because the client's like my boss, and I'm just engrossed and steeped in the culture of that place, which is really nice. That's always one of the challenges when you're working with a group as a freelancer, is that you don't know necessarily, or you have to spend time in your development process learning who they are and how to best capture their essence in the designs and in the work that you make for them.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I guess one thing too that was maybe a little unfair is because I asked you where do you start with graphic design, which is such a humongous umbrella of things. So maybe let's I bet you it would make sense to keep most of this conversation in context of let's say creating a brand logo.
Okay.
That's probably a good place where a lot of actually makers would start, especially if they want to start having an online presence, that they would want to design their logo first to kind of create their brand. So and so I'm sure the answer you gave would be somewhat similar. So let's give an example, and let's pick something that's not too obvious to what me and you do. Let's say someone is like a 3D printer. And so from that standpoint, what would your process be in designing a custom logo for an independent artist / maker who is a 3D printer?
Yeah. So so similar to what I was talking about before, you definitely want to know who that company is and what makes them unique. Another thing that I would make sure to do, especially if it's a 3D printing company or anything that's sort of a niche group, is to see what other companies who are in that same field are doing. I could think of sort of two examples, and I realize I'm wearing a Buffalo shirt right now. But you and I both know, living in Buffalo, there are Buffalo restaurants, there are Buffalo doctors' offices, and everybody has a Buffalo icon of some kind.
Buffalo.
Buffalo loves Buffalo, which could be okay, but a lot of times it's redundant. Same thing in puppetry. That whoever designed that logo on your shirt there, is a smart person, because as you can see, and I know we're joking about this, but I designed the logo. But what I actually really love about this is that you have 4 puppets there behind you, whose eyes like all match up. Like, someone to the untrained puppeteer eyes might just see like the Muppet eyes, but there's something really slight and special about the Krutinger eye focus. And I think it's evident in all the puppets you see there. So it was important for me to make it evident in that illustration that's on your shirt there. Versus a lot of people, when they do a logo for a puppet company, will sometimes just draw strings coming out of the letters. Even if it's not a marionette company. And even when it is a marionette company, sometimes I've joked about this with both Ronnie Burkett and Philip Huber, who are magnificent marionette artists, that they say they're not even strung properly. So like, if you're going to do that, at least make it so that it's like true. So like that, the letter R is actually, being puppeteered the right way or whatever. So you want to avoid those cliches, because that's going to, getting back to your initial question, that first bit of research is making sure that you're not creating a logo that's already been is already being used elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that makes you kind of uniquely positioned to probably be a really great graphic designer for other artists and makers, because you are also, I mean, I would think that many graphic designers are in the graphic design world, but you're very much so in the world of puppetry and as a writer as well. And I think that makes you aware of the kind of cliches that can come with those graphic designs, which can make you potentially more aware of things that you don't know when you're working with someone of a different niche that you're not familiar with.
Exactly. And not to say like that's what you're trained to do when you go to design school, or at least when I went to design school, is that you are randomly given an ad for an air conditioner box, and your professor tells you, like, this is what you're given. You gotta make a fancy ad for this, and you have no connection to air conditioners, and you think it's really boring because it's just a box, but you have to work your magic to make that be an interesting thing and to make it stand out. So that's part of the job, but I will say that's what I really like about working um, as an in-house designer, because I really get an opportunity to learn the ethos of that company. Or when I do, I because of my being a graphic designer full time in house, I don't really have to take on a lot of freelance projects. But when I do, it's for my elementary school, where I went for 10 years, and my mom had worked for 15 or 16 years, and like it's a brand that I know really well, and I feel like I can effectively carry it through in the design work. That's why I love doing stuff for the Puppeteers of America, or oh gosh. I'll tell you about that in a second.
Okay, I thought you sent me a school one.
I did, and
okay, I thought that was it. Hold on. Clearly, that's not it.
Let's see. Well, if you pull up the illustration of Damon.
Oh yes, yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, so Damon doesn't particularly have the most interesting looking buildings, and it's a very small campus, and it's hard to get a photograph of like any one building all in one place. So when I started there back in February, one of my first projects was to create something that could be kind of applied to either a bumper sticker or any kind of it could work great as a keychain, as a sticker on your laptop or something, and it combines all of the buildings in concert with all the beautiful foliage and stuff, because it's a really pastoral campus. And so not to say that someone who is working off site couldn't have created that, because it's not rocket science, but there's definitely an amount of kind of love and nurturing that someone who like went to that school and like works there all the time is able to give it. And like I said, working for the Puppeteers of America and all those things, or when I do stuff for other puppeteers, it's really helpful to be in the know.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I keep thinking about too is I've mentioned a couple of times how you kind of have your own style, and what happens when you are working with a client who is asking you to make choices that you really don't believe in from a graphic design standpoint about elements working together? How do you handle that, and what do you do in that situation?
It's really as much as you can without, of course, ever insulting the client, but because you want to make them feel empowered and comfortable, and you want to make sure that they don't can you midway through any project, and that I haven't had that happen yet, but it's about letting them know why their whatever instincts that they have might not be true to their brand. And this is actually something that this is the kind of thing that I really preach with my graphic design, is that you need to be true to your own form. I think that's where a lot of clients or people who do their own design, they don't understand how what they've created graphically is not properly communicating what their whole thing is about. It's like showing up to a first date in a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt. Like, you want to make sure that you're dressed for success. So that's why I think a lot of times, and I'll stay on puppetry because it's easy to pick on because we're in that family. But a lot of times people who maybe aren't steeped in that culture, or even people who are steeped in that culture but don't quite understand design, might think like, oh, puppets, it's fun and fancy free. Let's choose a font that that is kind of all over the place. So you end up with things like Comic Sans, or there's all sorts of like really casual fonts that end up pulling focus away from what you're trying to communicate, because all graphic design is visualized organization and proper communication.
Yes. No, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I know one saying that you've said before is like readability is key, and that's one thing I notice in a lot of artists and maker type designs, that you can kind of sometimes tell, even if they look good, sometimes you can still kind of tell that they made it themselves because of maybe some, even though it might be aesthetically pleasing, there's some basic piece missing that makes it more professional, I guess. I'm not quite sure what word I'm looking for.
And so there are times where there are designs that I see out there that I don't agree with, because they're either colors that I don't like or fonts that I don't love. But if it's true to what they're trying to communicate, then that's great. But it's when there's that disconnect that is it makes your heart hurt a little bit. And it's funny what you were saying before about readability. There was a couple of years back, the job that I was working at, we did a billboard campaign, and that was really eye-opening because we got all of the details on how to properly design a billboard from the company, Lamar Billboards, which I think they do like 80% of all the billboards on the East Coast. And they had this thing where you hold up a sheet of paper of your printout, and I think you stood 10 feet away from it, like whatever the perspective is to properly simulate when your car passes by it. And it said, have a coworker hold up that sheet of paper with the design for 5 seconds and then put it down, and then ask them, how much were you able to read? Or how much of that little flash were you able to like understand and comprehend what was being conveyed?
Yeah.
Because how many billboards do you drive by where it's like, I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ignore it. Or how many times you say, I didn't get all that information, but something about that composition was intriguing. I'm going to pay attention to that tomorrow when I'm driving on the highway again. And I'm going to want to make sure that I catch it the second time around.
Yeah. That's so important what you're talking about. And even though I bet you most of the people listening to this won't be designing billboards, that goes like kind of with what you were saying before about being true to the form, whether that's why you design some of those other designs to be for Instagram versus for YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever, making sure that you're really constructing it to do its best on each individual platform that it's on.
Right. I mean, think of the billboard. I said you get 5 seconds to drive by it because that's kind of how long you get when you're driving in your car. How quick does it take to swipe something past on a news feed? Like you're past that in seconds. So the more you could have that be something really eye catching that's really going to grab people's attention, the better. And that's why, as much as you want to make sure that when you're designing a campaign that you keep your imagery consistent, but that is definitely something to keep in mind of, maybe you don't put all the information excuse me, maybe you put all the information in if you're buying a magazine layout, or you're buying a you know, if you buy an ad in a theater program, let's say that's something that people might do either for a puppet festival or whatever, that you could put a lot of information on. But maybe when you spend that money on Facebook ads, you put less information and just have a really great image of your of your puppet with your logo or your website.
Maybe don't just scan your business card and submit that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Very common thing in playbills and brochures and whatnot.
But yeah, think about where people are seeing it, and you kind of have to tailor it a little bit.
Just to tie back into what I was talking about before about when you have a client that maybe is not necessarily on the same page as you.
Yeah.
How much of that responsibility you think is on the client versus on the graphic designer? And the example I'll give there is, did they choose the wrong graphic designer for that job? Or how much should the graphic designer change their typical aesthetic to fit the needs of the client?
That's a really good question. I think
a big factor that depends on how much money, how hungry they are for work. But that aside,
no, sometimes it's actually it could be really tough, because sometimes your client, everything that they have laid out, they have very stringent brand standards that you might disagree with, but you have to work within. And so you don't love that, but you say, okay, these are the creative challenges that I'm given. It's like, build a puppet with an empty jar and some plastic forks, and like the rest is up to you. When you're given those things as a designer, that's what you have to work with, and that's what you have to mold into the pretty work that you're doing. That being said, I think as much as a designer can feel comfortable that it is our job to educate the clients and make them understand. The more you can make them understand why you're giving those suggestions, you're not just saying that, because I want to take my own spin on, the local, the mattress shop down the street. It's like, no, I want to see you be successful. And, bad design is a form of pollution in the same way that like blaring crappy music, from your car for everybody to hear when you're driving on the highway is bad, sound pollution. Like the design and the work that we put out is going to influence people one way or another. And like I was saying before, you want to have that positive impact.
Yeah, no, interesting. And I think that's an interesting example you just gave. I could hear people fighting that back, saying like, just because you don't like that music doesn't mean the music isn't good. But in graphic design, though, I think there is a difference between a design you don't like versus one that is wrong. Right. How do you maybe point that out to a client or people learning?
I think it's helpful to show people examples of really strong design. And it's actually something really great when you can show them a strong influence that connects to their brand, but is in a different, from a different industry. So for instance, actually, two brands that like really do great design and advertising is Burger King and Arby's. They do like hysterical stuff. I follow both of their social media channels just because the ads that they put out are so hysterical, because they're having fun with it. I don't know if you saw it. There's a new Arby's ad right now that because of the pandemic, they weren't able to shoot like whatever new sandwich was their like big June promotional sandwich. So they just are reusing old footage and like they blurred it out and said like, don't ignore what's there because it's a different sandwich, but you're going to love it anyway. It's really funny. You should check that out. But if you can show people what good design can be and something to aspire to, and say like, you can infuse that fun that they're having at the chicken place into, the widgets that you're selling here. And that's something I think I've had the benefit of being this, weird oddball puppeteer, whatever when I work. For 4.5 years, I was at the Diocese of Buffalo, which was not my dream job, but I made the most of it. And now I'm at Damon, which is a place that I love, but it's not, necessarily the place that I imagine being growing up as a kid. And you bring that bit of yourself into it, and you mix that with whatever their brand is, and you could really, you make the most of it.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I like your examples too of those restaurants. I got to say, one company that I didn't even know is still in business that is doing a really great job on TikTok is Steakums.
Oh, no kidding.
I saw that they have their own channel. It's insane. I recommend people check out the Steakums TikTok channel because it's something to see. I can't explain it. Go check it out. But,
so could we pull up a couple examples real quick? Because I would love to just this will help touch on some of the things we've already done.
Yeah.
So if you pull up that Damon flyer again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong thing. Okay, let me see the Damon flyer. Oh, the one that you told me. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that one is right.
So my first week or two when I was working at Damon, I was shown the flyer that's on the left of the screen and said this was what was done for this this athletic speaker 2 years ago. You're the new graphic designer. Can you update it for the new person who's going to be speaking this year? And I thought, wow, this is a really busy flyer. And I asked, do I have free reign of what to do, or do I need to stick to what was already kind of designed, knowing that this was going to be a flyer that was, hung up in the walls of a very busy college. And I designed the one that's on the right, and it's all the same information, but there's a visual hierarchy there that kind of lets people know the most important things first, so that when you're walking from 15 feet away, there's something that catches your eye. This Callie Brownson woman, who I think was one of the first female coaches of the Buffalo Bills, and she people in the sports world would know who this person was, especially Buffalo sports. And then, again, you pass by it a couple times in your foot patterns, and then you finally have the instance of like, oh, let's go up and read the fine print and what information is there. And just these simple kind of things just make it a more compelling design. And again, it draws people's interest and draws people's eye for them to actually maybe be invested in that thing.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. And another thing I think is interesting is looking at it. I almost wish I had them as separate slides, because if I put up my hand and covered up the one and only saw that first one, I probably, if I was, in a boardroom or a boss, I would have said, yeah, looks good. All the info's there, go,
Yeah.
But then you look at it next to this one, which definitely has so much intention on the way it's designed, rather than just trying to fit all the puzzle pieces in. There's no question about how much nicer and more professional and elegant the other one looks. And that's, to me, I see that as a testament of, like, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So,
yeah, no, exactly. And it's also one of those things, like, it's the National Girls and Women's in Sports, I think it was day or whatever that event was. But the important thing that we're letting people know about is who that speaker was. So a third of the page doesn't need to be taken up by Damon college athletes who weren't even going to, be presenting. They're going to be in the audience. So, if you see name any poster for any musical that you like, the target, photos of the target audience for the show is not taking up the lower third of the poster. You know what I mean? So it was that kind of thinking that you in the same way, when you're writing, you don't want to have more information than is needed. It's the same kind of thing when you're doing design.
Yeah, another question I have too is, how do you know when a design is done? because I feel like it's almost like a sculpture, whereas like you could technically work on a sculpture forever, right?
Yeah.
And at some point you kind of have to call it done. For you, are there any signs that you see in working on a graphic design that can make you think you're done and or close?
When all the spelling is finally correct.
Is that it?
No, it's difficult. It really is. Like anything that, I'm sure any artist, you just have to be done with it, and it's usually because there's that deadline that finally comes up, and you've got other projects that need to move on. I look back at any of the work in my portfolio, and there's definitely things that can be improved or tweaked or what have you. But I think it's a matter of, is it saying what it needs to say? Is it communicating what I want to communicate? So a lot of times that's checking in with coworkers or the client or whoever to make sure that you've got it right. But sometimes it's just a matter of saying, you know what, this is the best that I can do in this moment. And again, working in-house, a lot of times it's just because it needs to be done because you're at your deadline.
Yeah, even when though, let's say you're designing something for yourself and or for a close friend, like maybe me. When you're doing something like that, like, do you ever like have a couple different concepts that are completely different, and maybe even you like them both? And if it was up to you to choose one, how do you pick one if it's your own choice?
Yeah, that's the trickier thing, and that's also something where I probably, and this is me being like, self-reflective and all that. I don't do as many options on things as I would do, certainly not for personal projects. But even, if I'm doing something for my in-house group, usually I would only create 3 options of something that I would then show my boss or supervisor or whatever. If I was truly working for a freelance client, I would present more options, more so because I maybe don't know the ethos of that company. I don't know quite what to expect, and there's also that it's that level of trust, I think, is really what it comes down to. Because again, for you and me, when we're working on stuff, I'm kind of able to just I'll show you one thing, and if you like it, that's great. I usually try to do 2 or 3 options just because you want to get that mustard water out. Like you have that 1 or 2 bad ideas that you never show again, and then you finally, by like the 3rd option, it's like, this is great. But it's also sort of like, if it whatever. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. But it's trusting your instincts, and I think I'm more confident now as a graphic designer than I was 2 months ago, and certainly more so than I was 6 years ago. And that's because of just the time that you put into things. And I think that it's the 10,000 hours, right? The more you're able to put into it, the more confident you feel. What's always, and this is like super dorky, and at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, but I always like when, because when I was first starting out in Illustrator, you are heavily relying on bringing in grid lines and such to make sure that you've got everything organized the right way. And what's really cool is when you finally get to a point where you could just eyeball it, and then you bring in your guideline at the end just to make sure, like, is this all lined up correctly? And when you find out that you've lined up everything perfectly just by eyeball, it's like, okay, like I'm finally confident enough with this program, with my skills, like all those sorts of things. And they're just little small indicators like that where it's like, okay, I got this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so in a couple of minutes, I want to actually have you show them your process by doing a little challenge I'm going to give you.
Sure.
But before we get into that, I want to talk about, because I'm sure you have many different techniques that you use. But one thing I think was interesting is, because whenever I play around with stuff, I'm taking all these elements in Illustrator and I'm moving things around to see what works. One thing that I thought was really interesting that you have done is on a project that you designed for me not too long ago, my cards, is that you actually did a hand drawing of the design first. And then what ended up being this one, which is, again, virtually the same. But I was very surprised to see the drawing version, because it seemed, in my opinion, even though it's a really cool process, like probably the less, I mean, it's not like Photoshop where you can just move things around. How does this work here? How does this work here? Whereas you were kind of committed to it with pencil and paper, rather than playing with things more.
Yeah, that I so I'm really proud of that design that I did, and you know, you and I both worked together on the photography and stuff. It was kind of dumb luck that it worked out the way it did. And I say that only because a lot of times when you design, there is a lot of trial and error and moving things around and changing proportions and stuff. That was a really kind of special moment. That's one of the pieces that I'm most proud of, because of how true it was to that initial design sketch. And I think really I did that sketch more so so that we had like a storyboard for when we were shooting the puppets for directing that photo shoot. I probably wouldn't have done that had we just had those photos already. In that case, it would have been more of trial and error.
Yeah.
But I think it was because we were going to do those very specific photos that I wanted to make sure that things were in the right place. And again, for that, I actually, the drawing that I did was the same size as the postcard that we were going to do. So I was really trying to lay it out the right way, versus, you know, just thumbnailing it or something.
Yeah, no, that's that again. And well, thank you. I love it.
Yeah.
People have liked it, and I just thought that was really interesting. So I wanted to make sure I asked that question.
Sure.
But anyway, so I sent you a folder.
Yes.
Yesterday, and do you mind opening up that folder?
Yeah, of course.
In a moment, I'll switch it over to your share screen so we can kind of walk people through.
I've got it up on my side screen here already. So.
Okay. So yeah, I add this here then.
Oh, this was so. Just real quick.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
This is the school mascot at Damon, and this was just we've been doing doodles of him as different like cartoon characters and stuff. Yes, for a project we're working on, and I'll just show you like real quick. What I like about this is I'm doing it all in Adobe Draw. And what's really cool, no, I turned off the wrong things. I'm just blown away because like that drawing there, like it works and I like it, but just how much like those extra details of the cross hatching, just that little extra volume that it gives it, I think is really cool. But so what proportions did you want me to do in for this piece?
Well, if you one of the files is the original file that I'd maybe I'd rather ask for a brief critique on, so people can see you flex a little bit.
So, you know what? I'm just going to share my whole screen now instead.
Okay.
Because I've got, let's see, I'm going to remove that from the stream. Sorry. Share screen. Screen one. Okay. So I got that up now.
There it is.
Okay.
So there is the logo that I made in a cell phone app. And I was like, oh yeah, this will work. Right? So before we Garrity-ize it, what are your thinking on this? Where did I go wrong? Where did I maybe go right? Do you hate it?
So I don't hate it, and this is one of those instances where I think you're being pretty true to form. I personally would have potentially liked to see maybe a different color choice in the letters, because I'm not personally a fan of the outer glow when it comes to the way you have the white sort of compensating for the fact that I imagine the black on the green wouldn't have been super legible. But I do like it's got that very handmade quality. I know a lot of the Instagram photos and stuff that you share are from the point of view of your work table. It's a very recognizable thing. So for the most part, that makes sense to me, because the letters have sort of a letterpress stamped quality. I probably would have liked that the live, which is like clearly a sort of a stamp format, would have had that same the same level of defect to it around the edges and stuff, because it's so sharp and clean versus the Maker Chat show and tell. But more so I apologize. My grievance with that, if I could, let's see. That's actually showing that.
I can bring it up.
Yeah.
This guy?
Yeah. So what I don't love about this is that you've got the same pattern twice and now it's smaller. So I would have liked to see either the background that's like behind Cameron Garrity be different, or something else, because it's those two patterns are sort of in conflict with one another, in my opinion.
Gotcha. So what also I had in that folder was some assets. And I thought I'd like to see a quick 10-minute typography Cameron Garrity version of Maker Chat Live show and tell.
You've got
it. You can. I think I would like you to at least use the matte, and I have two versions in there. One with the what do you call it? The vignette. One without.
Yeah.
I kind of like the vignette, but again, I'll trust your judgment.
Sure.
And if you have the assets of the exact, I mean, I don't have the typeface because it was an app, so I just exported it as here. Right. And I assume you probably don't want to use any of those anyway.
I think I'm going to pass on that. So I do like this. I'm, again, personally not a huge fan of the vignette. But you know what? I'll humor you, and I'll use that one instead, actually.
There should be a square version of both of them.
Yes. Okay. So I'm dropping that in here. Okay. And I was somewhat prepared for this as well. So I do have...
Yeah, I debated how much to, because I know you typically do the 10-minute typography, but then I was thinking, well, I should give him a little bit of a heads up, because you probably at least think about your idea throughout the day and then do it in 10 minutes. So it's like, oh, at least.
I was going to say, yeah, that's actually something, it's usually something that I spend some time kind of thinking about throughout my day. Now, what you're seeing here is really crude. And normally this is maybe something where I would, this is one of those typography challenges where I would spend more than 10 minutes on it. Because what I like about this, I'm, as I said before, you want to be true to form. So I really like the aesthetic that you have going of, the workspace. And a measuring tape is something that is more or less found in any maker's workshop in one way or another, whether or not it's a physical one, or in my case, already I'm going to turn my ruler on there.
It's like a surgeon with that pen tool.
Yeah, and I'll show you when we're back to my actually showing my screen what I've got, because I am using a different kind of mouse than most people would expect, and it's not that crummy one that you use.
You take that back.
So one of my first in our very first computer rendering class in college, we were given an image of a very standard rubber duck, think like Ernie's rubber ducky, and we were told to make outlines of that character with as few anchor points as possible. And I think our instructor actually said, like, you can't have more than like 8 anchor points. So you want to be as judicious as you can, if possible, when doing that.
And is this, out of curiosity, is this the technique you'll use for masking these types of things? Or are you, actually, I don't even know, I'm assuming you're masking those pictures, or are you creating your own now?
No, I'm creating my own
graphic
real quick.
I was gonna say, like, why don't you just do it in Photoshop and just delete the background?
Nope.
Image.
I would do that if I was just going to. I don't really enjoy masking complex images, so I am definitely more of a just erase the background type person.
I see. Interesting. So these photos are not going to be part of this image at all.
Nope, that was just.
I was going to say Stanley is not a sponsor yet.
Nah,
yeah,
not yet though, right? Yeah. No, so this is purely for my own reference. And making sure those vector lines. Okay. So now again, this is real crude. And I would definitely do more line work and assets and stuff to like really define that shape.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of this demonstration,
I guess I get what I paid for, huh?
Yeah. Try to create a little bit of, actually, no, I'm going to do this.
Now, did you pull some of that yellow from the background, or you just?
No, I'm using the swatch panel. And if I was feeling real crazy, well, I'll do it real quick. I do not recommend doing what I'm doing right now, but you can have a slight gradient so it feels more metallic than just
being gray.
Yeah. Come on. There we go.
I've had a hard time with gradients in Illustrator.
They don't make it easy, particularly. Okay, so this again is not the level quite of detail that I would want. And I'm going to now exaggerate this in playing with our perspective. Now, what I'm realizing I should have done is actually have a really nice version of this, like, done so that it could be like on a cooking show.
Oh yeah, should have been.
So now I'm going to go to this is Maker Chat, Show and Tell.
Yeah,
and then live. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I had. I mostly call it Maker Chat Live, kind of for short, but the show and tell aspect is a big thing about the show that I was hoping to implement to it. But it doesn't flow off the tongue as well as Maker Chat.
Not quite. So these are this is not new to people who who use Adobe Illustrator and Adobe fonts, but just so you can kind of see the difference here. This is my entire font library that has everything, the good and the bad. And then you could have a favorites tab where you kind of just pick the fonts that you like the best. And then these are the fonts that I've specifically downloaded from Adobe Fonts, which is fonts.adobe.com. If you have a Creative Cloud subscription, you can download any and all of these, but they're typically a slightly higher quality than some of the other things you'd get out there. I'm going to go with the HWT Arts because that is the font that I chose for Krutinger Puppets. So in this case, I'm presuming that we're keeping this in the sort of design family, the host of products that you would find from a Krutinger production. And
expanding Marvel universe of Krutinger puppets.
Exactly. And if I wanted to be really cool and edgy, I would do an envelope distort on this so that I could actually fit it into the perspective of the measuring tape that I have here. The drawback of this is that once you turn it into the mesh, now I can't change the color of that font anymore, which is not ideal. Oh gosh, I also shouldn't have tilted it before I did all that. That's better. I hope this is as boring as it feels to watch.
No, it's always interesting to watch the process a little bit, especially when just seeing sometimes the way other people use tools that you are familiar with, I think is always interesting too.
Yeah. What's crazy too is, and this is where I was saying before, where I am a more confident designer today than I was when I graduated 7 years ago now. The number of tools that I know now in Illustrator that I never knew existed when I was in undergrad is kind of baffling. Now, again, this is like really getting rushed just because I'm trying to
we're just showing basic tools, basic workflow stuff.
Yeah. And so
not necessarily looking for a final.
Sure. And so what I like then too is that I really enjoy sort of combining fonts and different type ideas. I'm trying to find the other Krutinger puppet font that I've used for other things. Is it that? No. There we go. So, not the best, but
yeah, you get the idea. I like the iconic imagery tied into it that you're right. It's kind of pulled across makers too, and
right.
I like it.
So that's a quick sort of approach. And honestly, this is probably one of those things where we spent not even 12 minutes on that, I don't think, or maybe it was, but that would be sort of a digital sketch that I might do very quickly to show as a proof of concept to someone. Because the worst thing, and this from from building is that you don't want to have to spend all this time creating something that a client is going to say, no, that's no good to. So the more you can kind of quickly mock things up and get your, not only the idea across, but let people know that this isn't the final, that whatever I deliver in the end is going to be really great. Because that's a mistake, excuse me, that I see a lot of people make, is that they show someone a sketch or something that's in progress, and they say it can be this, but they don't do a good enough job. And so the client or whoever they're working with says, no, I hate that. That looks terrible. And it's like, no, you don't understand. And people need to be better about, being as, to best communicate what their intent is going to be when they do deliver the final product.
Yeah. Well, we had a question pop up here.
Oh, sure.
It's a good one here. How do you recommend finding a graphic designer, not even knowing where to start? It seems overwhelming. And I would say, first of all, start. His contact information is going right across the bottom. No, but in general, for someone finding, one for a project, I think it ties in to what I was talking about a little bit before about finding someone that maybe matches your tone. Is that how you put it, perhaps?
Yeah. I think we're in a really great time right now where artists are really accessible, and there are so many freelance designers that you can just find people on Instagram and reach out and do direct messages to them, and usually people, especially if they're in need of work, are going to get back to you and respond as quickly as they can. And also, if there's a local business or someone whose work you really like, you have a local bakery and you say, I love who did that logo. Go to that business owner and say, hey, do you have that person's contact information? Also, if you have, and this is actually how I've recruited for things in the past, we have a lot of really great local design colleges, including Damon College, which is where I work and got my BFA. You can kind of ask them, if you're looking for an intern, you could ask them for a junior or senior who's really competent. But all those schools also have alumni networks to say, hey, do you have a great alumni who is looking for stuff? So those are some basic ways to look out for people.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah. What are some basic do's and don'ts of graphic design, would you say?
Ooh, legibility is a huge thing. So make sure that you're really focusing on your contrast, and that goes for not only just basic making sure that like you put a white on a black or a black against a white, but also, and this is something that some folks might not necessarily think of, but there are lots of color combinations that may seem to have contrast to those with perfect 20/20 vision. But if there are people who are colorblind or color impaired, making sure that within your tones, like a lot of like yellows and greens on a sheet of paper, if someone is colorblind, they're not going to be able to read that at all. So definitely making sure that you're addressing contrast. A lot of times they'll convert work into black and white to make sure that it's visible that way. Because the last thing you want to do is create work that's inaccessible to people. And then I think another really important do is to make sure that you have a couple solid fonts, something like Futura or Helvetica or a Myriad Pro. Pick a couple serif fonts, a couple sans serif fonts that are your go-tos, that really well, that out of the box they're going to work well for you, because those are sort of your bread and butter fonts that you could really use for anything because of how clean they are, how well constructed they are. And then again, and this is it's going to sound like a joke, and I don't mean this to be, never use papyrus. And it's Comic Sans has a place. It can be argued because it's a decently enough well designed. It's overused and it's not right for what people think they can use it for, but it has its place. Papyrus gets co-opted and used for anything that means anything exotic. You see it at the Egypt exhibit, you see it in the South Africa exhibit of a museum, and people just use it for any time they mean other. And we just need to remove that completely and 100% from our type vocabulary, because we can do better. Anybody can do better than Papyrus.
Yeah. I think it's also just a testament of just making sure whatever designs you do, trying to be a little bit different anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's overused in any art form is generally something you'd want to stay away from, especially if you want to stand out, which is what logos and design are supposed to do. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. Just to go back to a couple of your other designs, I just have a question of when you would. So I have this one that you've done, Mighty Choice. Okay.
Oh wow.
And looking at, again, some of these are probably pretty old.
Yeah, they are.
I dug through. So looking at the impact, the contrast, the layout you have here versus something like this. Okay.
Mm.
And I'm just looking, in my, even though to me, knowing you and your work, they both kind of scream Cameron Garrity in its own way. However, they also really couldn't be much more different in ways that are quite obvious. When is it okay to do something like this versus something straightforward like this?
The Treat Yourself one was really me trying to experiment with letters as texture, because aside from the one that's in the middle that like very prominently, and it's a much lighter or there's more contrast there to read Treat Yourself, all the other ones are kind of in the background, and I was trying to play with, I had found that really geometric font, and I wanted to try it out to see what patterns I could create. And then I was like, well, you gotta see it and understand it at least once, which is why I gave it that bright prominence. That could work really well, I think, for some kind of magazine spread or something, but it is not the most legible piece in the world. That was really an example of 10-minute typography being designed for Instagram, but also just really experimenting with what I could do.
That's right. Yeah, going back to being your exercise.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Another thing I just want to point out to people, because again, this is just the breadth of your work that we've looked at. There's much more, and the ones I chose are probably aren't necessarily ones that you would have chosen. But he's got literally hundreds and hundreds. This is just a screenshot of just a portion of one of your many series. How many 10-minute typographies have you done so far?
I think I'm up to 915 or so.
Yeah, there's quite a lot there. And if you like, in looking through this 900 different designs that he's made over the years, there are also available for people if they want to order them in different fashions. These are, I believe, magnets we have here, as well as other merchandise on your Zazzle account.
That's right.
And we'll make sure we put that down in the description for people as well, because there's a lot of a really interesting thing.
I make nickels at a time on those.
You're making nickels already? Well,
I'm making nickels. It's just enough that I don't have to pay shipping when I order stuff for myself.
Yeah.
Because the magnets, the 10-minute typography work really well as magnets, and I oftentimes will include them as Christmas cards to people, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing.
Yeah, so definitely check them out. And again, graphic design is a great way to level up yourself in many ways, even if you don't think maybe you need it. An example that I came across here was a resume that you did for somebody.
Mhm.
And I know even myself as an artist, for the longest time, I was like, resumes don't need to look fancy. They're just going to be a Word document with all your information. And then I, taken some graphic design advice from you, and I created one that was a little nicer. But I found one that you did, again, it's probably been a while ago, but one you did for a fellow friend.
Uh-huh.
And just looking at it and how much of it, again, it's very much a Cameron Garrity design.
Yes, it is.
Yes. But again, how clear everything is laid out. The way, how did you phrase it before about about organizing
Visual hierarchy.
the visual hierarchy? You can, I mean, that this screams that in so many ways, and it's very clear, very legible, and very straightforward to what people are looking at and how to look at it, which I think is really, really great.
The special trick with that one too is that Phil, and he won't mind me saying this because it was specifically why he asked me to do that. He didn't have that many acting credits, so if you look at that, it's there's a lot of filler on that to make it seem more impressive than it was, because he was really kind of just getting started out and wanted to be able to get more work. So this was a way that we were kind of trying to help him get boosted a little bit.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and it's funny you say that, because I think that's interesting of just even clients being honest with the person that they're working in to what their needs are, rather than, I can imagine there are many clients that just say, here's my resume, make it look good, right? Versus having some intention on what you're trying to do on many fronts, whether it's making it seem like there's more on there than there necessarily is, or wanting a certain type of tone to what you're creating. So one of the last things I just want to bring up really quick, because I think this is the question people tend to have the most in any sort of arts and maker, is how you come to a price when you're doing commission type work with people. Because I think design, this could be related to many art forms, but specifically in graphic design, like I'm not sure if it's like hourly like it can be for other things, because in a sense a design is something you want quick, right? And like a lot of custom work, doing it extra quickly is a reason why it might cost more. So how do you manage your price between compensating yourself for the time and the effect that's going to have for the clients, how they're going to use it?
Sure. It's slightly tricky, and I'm not necessarily the best person to ask about pricing, because I do it full time. So my hourly rate for working at the place of employment that I'm at is actually sort of lower than I would be doing if I was a freelance, because now I'm getting health benefits and stability and all that sort of stuff you can imagine. But when I take on projects, because at that point it's stuff outside of my normal time, I do time and a half with from whatever I'm making at my agency position where I'm in house. And that I never, I always let people know that I have printers who I would recommend, but I do not include printing costs in any of in any of the work that I get. I leave it up. It's the responsibility of the person, my client, to get that printed.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Cam, for coming on.
Absolutely.
I know people learned a lot about graphic design, and at least basic ideas and how to get started. And at bare minimum, I hope what people pull away from this is, maybe I should hire someone rather than doing it myself. But that being said, is there any final words you'd like to leave to the audience?
Yeah, I would just say I know I said it sort of tongue in cheek earlier, but
he really wants you to use papyrus. He really
there's that. No, that's okay. But poor design really is a kind of visual pollution, and it's our responsibility to make sure that what we're putting out is something that's going to have a strong impact. Everybody can do their part. As much as I would like to say everyone should hire a graphic designer, that's not always the case, but everybody could do their best to, really consciously think about what they're designing, making sure they're being true to their form, and also working on their own skills. Not everybody needs Adobe Illustrator or the Creative Suite, but there are apps on your phones. There's Microsoft Word. I spent my first 6 years, like all through high school and part of college, doing stuff in Microsoft PowerPoint. There's all sorts of options out there for people to kind of learn these basic skills.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well,
yeah. You know what? I'm so sorry. One other thing. I was on an episode of this show you may have heard of called Puppeteers a couple months ago. And if you go to my episode page on that, which is puppeteers.com/Cam Garrity, there is a design homework kind of 101 that people can download. And it's just some basic homework that I have that people can download. There's instructions you can follow, and it's based on one of the first design challenges that I was given in a computer rendering course. So it'll help you if you are trying to get associated with, trying to learn these programs.
Wonderful. And up on the screen here is Cameron's website, camgarrity.com. Make sure you check it out for information. Follow him on Instagram at Cam Garrity, on Instagram and everywhere else. Well, Cameron Garrity, thank you again so much for coming on the show. And everyone else, stay tuned for another awesome episode coming at you very shortly. Bye.